Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to A4S for inviting competent boards to have a session here at the A4S Summit. A few years back, we also were invited to have a session, and we had a session about what are the competences, what are the insight, what are the attributes that board of directors will need in the future. Out of that, we had a report, we had a survey where we asked directors and executives all over the world what they would say would be those attributes. Out of that, the report came that we need to have a brain, we need to have a heart, and we need to have hands to actually do action. You have access to that report. Now we're taking a step further and started the Future Boardroom. The Future Boardroom is to look at what is it we need to make happen in order for boardrooms to also get ready for the future. We're talking a lot about the transformation of companies, but what about the transformation of the boardroom? What about the transformation of the C-suite? What about the transformation of accountants? So that's some of the discussion that we will have today. So I think with that, again, thank you for having us today, and a warm welcome to my two guests, Professor Mervyn King and Carolyn. Please start by telling us a little bit about yourself.
My life's has been divided into three sections: law, business, and governance. And the latter, I would say 30 years, has been perhaps my most interesting time in my life. And that is in regard to governance. And I was privileged to be the chair of the Eminent Persons Group at the United Nations on Governance, chair of the GRI, chair of the International Integrated Reporting Council, then chair emeritus of the Value Reporting Foundation after the IRC merged with the Sustainability Accountancy Standards Board. And now I'm very involved with discussions with the IFRS people in trying to align the standards for sustainability reporting disclosures with those that have come out of the EU, which are double materially inside out, whereas the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board, and the IFRS is focused on outside impacts on the company itself. And of course, very importantly, I'm the patron and founder of the Good Governance Academy, which I founded about 3 years ago because through my traveling around the world, I just realized that business science issues were not being taught the same at business schools and universities around the world, and certainly were not being understood by boards in the same way. So I started a course, a postgraduate course at my alma mater on integrated thinking and value creation, and then started the Good Governance Academy, of which Carrie is the chief executive. And that is to marry SDG 4 quality education with SDG 17 collaboration. And I have support members who are the support members around the world, like AICPA, ICAEW, IOD UK, etc. And through that, we communicate with, and we give a summary of our colloquia, which we hold, or fireside chats we hold, with business leaders to 5 million accountants, directors, lawyers, and corporations from 135 countries. So I regard that as a huge success in 3 years, and it excites me. And because of my discussions with the IFRS, I became very aware that there was not an alignment in thinking on the sustainability reporting. And so we founded the ESG Exchange to try and get a playbook developed for especially the middle tier companies and the third rung companies, if I may call them that, and unlisted companies, so they knew how to do a sustainability report, depending on what the regulator in their particular country decides on the standard of disclosure. So sorry, that's a long introduction.
But Carolyn, you have the honor to actually work with Mervyn every single day. But tell us a little bit about yourself, and perhaps a tiny bit more about what Mervyn also is doing.
Yes, thank you so much, Hela. My background is really in information, and I use technology, of course, with information. So people call that IT, but it's really data and technology. And that's my background, and large program and strategy enablement. So large change initiatives is my background. I got involved with corporate governance being in an investment organization, investment company, and having to turn around organizations from the IT and operations side, and having to do that at a board level without managerial involvement. So I really got an understanding of how to direct and oversee, as opposed to, and the difference between that and management. And of course, I lent on South Africa's King reports, which are named after Professor King. And I was involved really from not the listed entity reports, which are really in King 1 and King 2, the first two versions of those reports, but really from the third version that was published in 2008, which brought in the IT governance portion, which was the first standard in the world, really, to put IT on a boardroom table. So that was very exciting. And of course, the subsequent publication is King 4, which brings in outcomes-based governance, also a concept that was brought in by Prof. King. So on that basis, we took it to an international stage and really brought some of that thinking into an ISO standard now called ISO 37000. And that is now an international benchmark. So Prof. King's not only has an international impact on sustainability reporting, but also, of course, now an international standard of corporate governance and governance of organizations that's really founded on those initial reports. And that's really me, and as the chief executive of the Good Governance Academy, and also of the ESG Exchange now. Thanks, Helen.
Should we imagine the future boardroom? Look out to the future. What's the purpose of that boardroom? What is it? Who is sitting around the boardroom table? What's on the agenda?
Well, you certainly don't have grey-haired men or women sitting around the table. You've got to have, Carolyn touched on it, and it's a theme I've had for the last few years, that everybody talks about diversity, but to me, the most important diversity is intergenerational diversity. So I've advised many boards. They think being 23 years old is too young to have on your board as a director, but you form an advisory board of these Generation Z people. And you've got an issue which you've discussed, and you put it to this advisory board, and it's like light bulb experiences. Suddenly they see things which we haven't seen. It's fascinating to me that you discuss it with the board, and the board needs experience, and you've got the input of the millennials, but then go and discuss the issue with the Generation Z, and they will just add something. And it's also fascinating to me that young people today are desperately looking for internship, to be an intern, but they will not become an intern in an organization which has still got the mindset of silo thinking and not integrated thinking, and hasn't got that thinking of value creation, preservation or erosion, or to adopt Carolyn's word, generation. But to really think, is this organization adding value to society? So we have to get this right. And ESG has become a critical factor. We've got to read and understand. And maybe you have a chairman and make sure you do understand and you actually contribute to making that business judgment call in the long-term health of the company.
Carolyn, how do you imagine the future boardroom?
To the point about AI and artificial intelligence and machine learning, I think that can go so far, and it can certainly help us deal with very large, complex problems that we're not ordinarily able to deal with. But I think the boardroom will still be populated with humans, and it needs to be populated with humans. It's the complexity of intent, personality, backgrounds that you can't, that's intuition. that you can't get currently from any kind of technology. And decisions really need to be made on that kind of context. Yes, the information needs to have been interpreted in an unbiased way, and all the information needs to be available for that decision making. But I think there will still be people in the boardroom. There still needs to be people in the boardroom to make those kinds of decisions. Of course, those people need to be, as we've spoken about already, it's the changing competencies, changing backgrounds, diversity. So I think we need that kind of changing boardroom environment. I also feel that we're going to be, as I was saying about the rapid change that we're facing, far more on top of being able to deal with risk and opportunities. To Prof. King's point, is that we're no longer going to be sitting looking at a red, amber, green risk report and going, well, okay, no real uncertainty to our strategic objectives, because in fact, every day we're living with increasing uncertainty placed on our strategic objectives. So I think the boardroom of the future is going to be far more risk aware and being able to deal in that risk environment, the VUCA world, right? So I think the directors of the future need to be a little bit more agile. Adaptability comes into play, resilience. So we're not talking about just business continuity and disaster recovery. We're actually talking about the skills and the competencies to rapidly change and transform organizations. I think that's going to be the big change in terms of boardrooms of the future.
The agendas of boards have just got to change. So, for example, you should have an agenda item, stakeholder relationships. You have a report, and many companies have got a senior executive, which hopefully he or she has been chief executive of a company. That's in their job description. And there, the stakeholder relationship officer actually talks to stakeholders and then does a written report to the board. So the board is up to date as to what's happening with that relationship with its stakeholders. And the board becomes more informed in making that judgment call for the company. So stakeholder relationship should be an agenda item. Inputs to outcomes, an agenda item, so that you actually discuss it and people are aware of it. And I can go on and on with my supply chain is the other one. Because what have we learned? We've learned that a major supplier in our supply chain, if they are employing child labor, for example, in order to cut expenditure, and that becomes known, our company listed on the NYSE could lose 40% of its market cap the next day. So supply chain should be on the agenda, that we actually know what's happening in our supply chain. We should be monitoring how they're doing. And hence, it's very interesting that smaller companies are doing integrated reports today who never did them before. Why? Because the top company is pushing to them to make sure they're being managed properly and governed properly.
Because sustainability reporting requires the scope 3 emissions to consider the supply chain. So the supply chain is becoming more and more important, and they're going to be forced to do sustainability reports as well, just because we actually live in a system. We don't live on our own. And that goes to the heart of the integrated reporting approach, is the integrated thinking.
So how do board members, how do executives, how do investors best prepare for this, let's just say, evolving role? It's almost like a transformation that we also need to see, not only of the businesses, but also of the boardroom, also of the C-suite, also of the investors.
Well, they should enroll at my university and take the diploma course on value creation and integrated thinking. And it's now being taught at the School of Accountancy at my alma mater, which I started. And I'm pleased to tell you that it's being adopted by other universities. And the most important one is Audencia, which is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, business school in the world. It's 128 years old in France. And they took my thinking and created the CVO MBA, Chief Value Officer MBA. And that's what's going to happen in the future. Our major bank in South Africa hasn't got a CFO. They've got a CVO, And underneath him, he's got a chief financial director and a chief sustainability director reporting to him. And he's a director on the board, the chief value officer. That's the future.
Definitely training. I think this is a new space, and it hasn't been taught, and we don't have it in our curriculum. And it's something that we should have always had, but it wasn't really considered as material enough to really instill. But accountancy has been, and accountancy's been throughout our lives because we live with it all the time. Now we need to very rapidly climb that ladder and understand concepts that we've never really understood before, and terminology that we've never really understood before, and all the new acronyms. I thought IT was bad with all of our acronyms, but the sustainability space, I mean, just the acronym ESG and all the arguments around ESG as an acronym. It's just an acronym for a concept, and we use lots of other acronyms at ISSB and ISB and ESRS, and there's just so many around there. So I think there is a whole new language that we need to explore and discover. Prof. King in our 8th colloquium of the Good Governance Academy pulled out a dictionary from many years ago, and I'll leave him to tell the story, that this language wasn't around so many years ago, and that not so long ago. And we need this new language, and it means that everybody needs to have some background, needs to learn how to speak this new language, and not only just speak the new language like we learned with cybersecurity and black hats and white hats, but actually understand what it means and experience what it means, so that we can make informed decisions that's got some kind of insight behind it, as opposed to just on the face of things. And we have got some experience. And this is a very difficult thing to do because we don't have any experience at this. So how do we rapidly get to have some experience? And that's where we've developed the ESG exchange. Really what that is an instant in the box, here is a project plan to repurpose your kitchen for these new ingredients. And we don't know how to do it. We've never worked with these ingredients before. And now we're having to work with it. And as a director and as a board member, we're not working with these ingredients in the kitchen itself, which is actually putting us at a bit of a disadvantage. So we need to do even more work to get to understand what is happening in this kitchen with these new ingredients, what to do with missing ingredients, how do they interact with each other, how does it work with heat? So really we are learning a whole new technique here in the boardroom.
Maybe talk a little bit to us about, when we have all of these new developments and we know that we need to get to some certain point, so it's not disclosure for disclosure's sake, but we also have a lot of, especially smaller companies that might not have the resources or mindset that you have to keep track on all of these and what to do. Tell us a little bit about
that. That's exactly the reason why we started the ESG exchange. That to understand this change in corporate reporting to be accountable, otherwise you're not going to be accountable, and B, how to do a report. How do you do it? I mean, the average director of a non-listed company has probably never done sustainability reporting in his or her life. And suddenly they were going to be mandated, I believe, in the next 2 years. Countries around the world, the regulators will mandate sustainability reporting simply because of the degradation of planet Earth and in the long-term interests of the society of that country. So once it's mandated, how do they go about it? The exchange was formed, and what we want to do is do a playbook. So just to get an understanding of what sustainability reporting, which really is an umbrella term for the ESG factors, and how do you mine that information, how do you get it, and how do you do a sustainability report? And that's going to depend, of course, very much on the IFRS and the EU, and hopefully the SEC, aligning those standards so we don't have different standards
We're talking a lot about the directors, we're talking about the C-suite, the CFOs, chief value creation officers. What about the accountants? What about all of the accountants, all of the auditors around the world?
Well, you're absolutely right. And that's why in 2012, IFAC gave me an award for changing the thinking of the profession forever. Because I said, I wrote the book Chief Value Officer, and the subtitle was Accountants Can Save the Planet. And of course, it led to debates around the world. I mean, everybody thought I'd lost my mind. But it's true, because the accountant who becomes the CFO is actually the steward of the business affairs of the company. And as a steward of those business affairs, he or she has had that training, so they become the true change maker in the boardroom. They can see they've got to move to a value creation process away from this acting in the best interests of the shareholders, which was very a short-term profit there. And it was a profit subsidized by society and the environment. And you can no longer ignore the impact which a company has on the environment, and you cannot also ignore the impact which the environment has on the company. So you've got to take these things into account. And I think the person best equipped to do that is the accountant. And Alan Johnson happens to agree with me. So he wrote me an email the other day saying the whole accountancy profession salutes me for changing their thinking. And, well, it's very interesting. I mean, Carolyn knows, I think I introduced you to Nick McGeegan from Monash University, Kerry. And Nick and I mean, this is about 7-8 years ago, he said, well, we've got to test this out. And what he did was he took a couple of accountants who were senior accountants, and he got them to have dinner with a lady from the Department of Music, and then a dinner with the Department of Arts. And they started the discussion, and the accountant came back in a very tunnel way and they didn't know this was being recorded. And he eventually, of course, disclosed to them it had been recorded. And he did this, and he edited it and put it all together. And you could see this tunnel thinking of the accountant came out when they're discussing matters of art and music and everything. And you can Google it. What is the name of it, Carrie? I've just forgotten. Having Dinner with an Accountant, I think.
Something like that. I can't remember offhand.
Having Dinner with an Accountant, Monash University. So anybody online listening, Google that and have a look at it. And you'll see, I mean, for example, Nick thinks one of the critical things an accountant should learn is philosophy. Now, that's because you're thinking differently. You're not thinking, and you've got to be a bit of a philosopher. You think about it in this new world of the ESG. And I studied philosophy at university, happily, quite unwittingly I did it, but I did it. And I found it one of the best things I ever studied at university. I mean, it taught me about logic. It taught me about premise. It taught me about foundational thinking. And it was the most amazing subject I ever learned at university. It's held me in good stead my whole life. So do a course in philosophy, Helen.
Think about that transformation to the future boardroom. What are the stones that we will find on the way? What are the kind of like the how do we get there in the best way? And but also what can we expect that we are going to find of stones that we will, fall over and have to get up again in order to get to that future boardroom?
Well, we need people like I don't know who it was who wrote an article in I think it was the Washington Post, that boards taking account of the ESG factors is just a fad. That really we will soon return to the primacy of the shareholder, because really Milton Friedman was absolutely correct. The sole purpose of a company is to make profit and to increase making profit. at the cost to society and the environment, Mr. Friedman? Did you mind that for 150 years profits were made subsidized by society and the environment? And the proof of the pudding is in the eating, because we know the earth has been degraded. We know by the 80s there was a realization of the degradation. So the Brundtland Commission was appointed, and her findings, her committee's findings, was very clear that, and very quaintly put, that people, planet, and prosperity, the 3 Ps, were critical for sustainable development for us and for those who come after us. And if you think that's a fad, well, I think that's the best promotion I've ever heard of the ESG factors, because it's patently not a fad. It's patently the company acts in the context of the universe. And you can't make business judgment calls just thinking of the bottom line and not worrying about what's happening to your waste, for example.
Do we have something more positive to end this on?
Yes.
What your thoughts on this?
We do have this positive thinking that I think the great institutions of standard setting and framework providing, such as I4S, the EU, the SEC, China, has started saying we have to set standards on these ESG factors. Because if you look at the makeup of the market cap of companies, only 20 or 30% of the makeup of the market cap is reflected as additives in a balance sheet. What's the rest? Well, what is it that people are actually saying actually on a buy and sell demand basis, actually fixing that price? And it is that there are factors that are being dealt with properly by a board for the longevity of the health of that company. Because if you and I are trustees of a pension fund, that would be our duty to invest in the equity of companies that have longevity, because on an actuarial calculation, we probably have to pay out the whole of our pension fund, let's say in 27 years' time. So we better make sure we take account of these ESG factors before we invest our beneficiaries' money in the equity of that company. And so I think it's positive, because it's actually, we've got I think, with mandating sustainability reporting, corporate reporting is the way directors become accountable or are accountable. And if we have a standard of, the end game is to have a global comprehensive corporate reporting system. So you and I can compare a company in Morocco with one in Lithuania, with one in the US, one in Australia, wherever it is, on the same basis. But to have a sustainability mandated around the world, which I think is going to happen over the next couple of years, is going to be one of those big steps, one of those big stones in the stream of all this flowing down the stream, to step on the other side of the river where we find this end game of a global comprehensive corporate reporting system, which I think can actually save the planet, because then you get those ESG factors being dealt with in a proper manner.
So it's not only accountants, but also board of directors and other leaders that will save the planet.
Absolutely.
Wow. Thank you both for your wisdom, your insight, and your good advice, including that we all need to start thinking about philosophy and not only be chief financial officers or accountants or directors, but actually be stewards, actually be value creation officer, value creation accountants, value creating directors, be stewards of the future. A warm thank you again also to A4S for inviting us to do this. And please, everyone that sees this, feel free to reach out with questions and ideas. And also if you want to take part in the Future Boardroom and share your wisdoms, share your questions, and help us transform boardrooms and to become the future boardrooms that really will create value for us all. Thank you all.